With $80,000 in student loan debt and 3 jobs that barely covered her rent, Amara Thompson was one missed shift away from complete financial collapse until a 4-year-old autistic boy who wouldn't speak to anyone reached for her hand. She didn't know the child's father was Park Jin-woo, one of the most dangerous men in the city, or that speaking Korean to calm a stranger's meltdown would change her life forever. But Park saw what happened, and men like Park Jin-woo don't forget when someone touches what belongs to them. At 24, Amara balanced her life like a performer spinning plates on sticks, knowing that any moment everything could crash. She worked mornings as a Korean language tutor for wealthy families, afternoons at a university library, and evenings doing online translation work. She was 6 months from completing her certification as a child behavioral therapist, a dream she'd chased since her younger brother had been diagnosed with autism 15 years ago. Her natural hair was styled in neat 2-strand twists pulled back from her face, and her warm brown skin showed the exhaustion of someone running on 4 hours of sleep and determination. She was practical, focused, and increasingly desperate as each loan payment deadline approached like a wave she couldn't outrun. The Riverside Shopping District was her Tuesday and Thursday territory, where she tutored the teenage children of Korean-American executives who wanted their kids to maintain language fluency. The afternoon was typical, overcast and cool, the kind of autumn day that made people walk faster toward warm cafes. Amara was between appointments, sitting on a bench reviewing notes for her next student, when she heard the sound that made her training kick in before conscious thought. A child was screaming. Not the normal tantrum cry of a kid denied candy, but the desperate, overwhelmed shriek of a nervous system in complete overload. Amara's head snapped up. 50 feet away, near the Fountain Plaza, a small boy was on the ground, his body rigid, his hands hitting his own head repeatedly. A woman in an expensive coat, presumably his nanny, was kneeling beside him, hands fluttering uselessly, her voice rising in panic that only made things worse. A small crowd had gathered, that typical circle of concerned observers who had no idea how to help. Security guards were approaching, looking ready to intervene in ways that would only escalate the situation. Amara was moving before she decided to move. Her backpack dropped on the bench, her training materials forgotten. She pushed through the small crowd, her voice calm and clear. "Excuse me, let me through." The nanny looked up, tears streaked and desperate. "I don't know what to do. He won't stop. He's never this bad." Amara knelt on the cold concrete 2 feet from the boy, not touching, not crowding, just creating a presence. The child was maybe 4 years old, with straight dark hair and beautiful features twisted in distress. His hands were still hitting his temples, his eyes squeezed shut, his whole body locked in fight or flight with nowhere to go. She didn't speak English. Instead, her voice dropped into the soft melodic Korean she'd spent 2 years perfecting during her study abroad in Seoul, the language that had become her escape and her future. The words came gentle and rhythmic, matching the pattern of his breathing, creating a cadence that bypassed panic and spoke directly to the need for order. "Ginchana. It's okay. Chunchani. Slowly. Nanan irgi hisa. I'm here." She didn't touch him, not yet. She lowered her own body, making herself smaller, less threatening. Her hands moved in slow, predictable patterns in his line of sight, creating visual rhythm. She kept speaking, the same phrases, over and over, letting the repetition build a bridge between chaos and calm. "Sumerchio. Breathe. Gachi. Together. Chunchani." Slowly. The boy's hands slowed. Just fractionally, but enough. His eyes, squeezed so tight they were just lines, cracked open slightly. Amara didn't change her rhythm, didn't speed up with hope or slow down with relief. She maintained the exact same pace, the same gentle tone, the same predictable presence. "Buseo. Look. Nanan irgi hisa. I'm here. Anjanu. You're safe." His breathing began to match hers. Deep and slow, in through the nose, out through the mouth. His hands stopped hitting and instead pressed flat against his head, holding rather than hurting. His eyes opened fully now, dark and enormous, looking directly at her face. Amara smiled, small and genuine. "Jariso, good job. You're doing so well." She extended her hand slowly, palm up, not reaching for him, but offering. The boy stared at her hand like it was a foreign object, something that required categorization before interaction. Then, in a movement so tentative it barely disturbed the air, his small fingers stretched out and touched her palm. The contact was feather-light, testing. Amara didn't grab, didn't close her fingers around his. She simply stayed still, letting him control the interaction. His fingers slid more firmly into her palm, and his body, which had been rigid with stress, softened incrementally. "Ginshina," she whispered. "You're okay now." The nanny was crying openly now, hands pressed to her mouth. The crowd had fallen completely silent, several people with phones out but motionless, captured by the moment. The security guards had stopped their approach, standing uncertain. Amara was only aware of the child, this small person who had been drowning in sensation and found a lifeline in her voice. She sat back on her heels, their hands still connected, and started humming. It was a Korean children's song she'd learned from her host mother in Seoul, simple and repetitive, the kind of melody that lived in the bones. The boy's eyes tracked her face, intense focus replacing previous panic. His breathing was even now, his body loose. After a long moment, he pulled his hand back, but gently, and wrapped both arms around himself in a self-soothing gesture. He didn't make eye contact again, his gaze sliding to the side, but his body language had transformed from emergency to manageable stress. The nanny scrambled forward, finally able to approach without escalation. "Thank you, oh God, thank you. I've been working with him for 6 months, and he's never had anyone outside the family calm him like that. How did you? What did you? I don't even understand what just happened." Amara stood slowly, brushing off her knees, suddenly aware of the cold concrete and the crowd's attention. She kept her voice low and professional. He was overstimulated. Too much input, probably too much noise and movement. Speaking Korean created a different neurological pathway, something he could focus on while his system reset. The rhythm and repetition gave him something predictable to anchor to. The nanny was nodding frantically, reaching into her designer purse. "I need to pay you, or thank you, or something. Please, let me get your information." The family, they'd want to know who helped. Amara smiled and shook her head, already backing away. "I'm glad he's okay. Just give him some quiet time, low stimulation. He'll be all right." She turned to leave, retrieving her backpack from the bench, already mentally shifting back to her own impossible schedule and the tutoring session starting in 10 minutes. She didn't notice the man standing 30 feet away, partially obscured by a marble column, who had watched the entire interaction with an expression that had cycled through shock, disbelief, recognition, and finally something that looked like hunger. Park Jin-woo was not a man given to public emotion. He controlled his expressions the way he controlled his empire, with absolute precision and calculated purpose. But watching this unknown woman kneel on cold concrete and speak Korean to his son, watching Miho, who had never reached out to anyone, not his nanny, not his therapists, not his own father, reach out and touch this stranger's hand, Park's control had fractured. He was a study in dangerous elegance, dressed in a black suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent, the fabric cut with such precision it looked like armor. His features were sharp and controlled, high cheekbones and a jaw that seemed carved from stone, dark eyes that missed nothing and gave away less. His dark hair was styled back from his face, exposing a forehead that might have seemed aristocratic if not for the cold calculation in his expression. Everything about him screamed wealth, power, and the kind of danger that didn't announce itself but simply was. He was out of place in a public shopping district the way a wolf was out of place in a petting zoo, too predatory, too controlled, too aware. He had been following at a distance while Miss Chun, Miho's nanny, took his son for the weekly outdoor exposure his specialists recommended. Park never let Miho go anywhere without his security team, for men in subtle positions around the plaza, but Park himself had decided to observe today. He did this sometimes, watching his son from a distance, trying to understand the locked world Miho lived in, trying to find some key to reach the child who was his only family and yet remained completely inaccessible. And then this woman had appeared and done the impossible. Park's hand moved to his jacket, withdrawing his phone, his eyes never leaving the woman as she walked away. He pressed a single button. His head of security answered on the first ring. "Find out everything about the woman with the backpack walking north from Fountain Plaza," Park said, his voice low and absolutely controlled. Black woman, mid-20s, black jacket, natural hair. I want her name, address, employment, financial status, criminal record if any, known associates, and daily routine. I want the file in 1 hour. Yes, sir. The line clicked off. Park's eyes tracked the woman until she disappeared into the crowd. His expression had returned to its usual controlled blankness, but his mind was racing with possibilities and plans. Miss Chun was still kneeling by Miho, the boy now calm but exhausted, leaning against his nanny with the boneless weight of a child whose system had shut down after overload. Park approached, his presence causing Miss Chun to look up with relieved recognition. Mr. Park, I didn't know you were here. Did you see what happened? I saw, Park said quietly. He knelt beside his son, studying the small face that was so like his own and yet so foreign in its distance. Miho's eyes were half closed, but he wasn't asleep, just retreated into whatever internal space he found safety. Park wanted to touch him, to pull his son close, but he knew from 4 years of experience that physical contact often triggered another meltdown. Instead, he simply stayed near, his presence the only comfort he could offer. Who was she? Park asked, though he would have the answer soon enough. I don't know, Miss Chin said miserably. She wouldn't give me her name. But sir, she spoke to him in Korean and he listened. He reached for her. He's never done that. Never, not with anyone. Park's jaw tightened fractionally, the only visible sign of the emotion surging beneath his control. He stood, extending a hand to help Miss Chin up, then gestured to his security team. Time to go home. As they walked toward his car, a black Mercedes with tinted windows and a security team that would make a president jealous, Park was already planning. This woman, whoever she was, had done in 3 minutes what expensive specialists couldn't do in years. She had given his son a moment of peace, had created a connection where none had existed before. Park Jinwoo had not built an empire by ignoring opportunity or by failing to acquire valuable assets. And this woman, he thought as he helped Miss Chin settle Miho into his car seat. This woman who spoke Korean to crying children and had magic in her voice. She was the most valuable thing he'd found in years. For folks who found themselves in impossible situations, in cities where the cost of living crushed your dreams before you could even articulate them, you know that feeling Amara was living. That sense of drowning slowly, of working yourself to exhaustion just to stay in place, never moving forward, never catching a break. If you've been there, if you're there now, drop a comment with your city or state. Sometimes it helps to know you're not alone in the struggle. By the time Amara made it to her tutoring session, she'd already compartmentalized the incident at the plaza, filing it under interesting but irrelevant to her survival. She had 45 minutes to help a 16-year-old understand verb conjugations, then a shift at the library, then 3 hours of translation work before she could finally sleep. The child she'd helped was a moment of professional validation, proof that her training was working, but nothing more. She had no way of knowing that across the city, in an office decorated with expensive minimalism and protected by men with guns, Park Jinwoo was reading her file with the focus of a predator studying prey. Or that by morning, her carefully constructed life built on debt and determination was going to collapse and be replaced by something she couldn't imagine. She didn't know that speaking Korean to a stranger's child had marked her, that Park Jinwoo had already decided she belonged to him and his son, or that dangerous men never asked permission when they wanted something. She just knew she was tired and broke, and that tomorrow would be exactly like today unless something changed. Something was about to change. Park Jinwoo was very good at making things change. 3 days passed before Amara's world tilted off its axis. 3 days of the same exhausting routine that had defined her life for the past 2 years. Tuesday melted into Wednesday, melted into Thursday. Each day measured in coffee consumed and hours slept, in tutoring sessions and library shifts and translation work that made her eyes burn by midnight. She'd almost forgotten about the child at the plaza, filed them away as just another moment in a life full of moments that led nowhere. Thursday evening found her walking out of a tutoring session in the Greenwood neighborhood, her last appointment of the day finally complete. The Korean-American teenager she'd been working with had spent an hour complaining about having to learn a language she'd never use, and Amara had spent that hour smiling patiently while mentally calculating whether she could afford both groceries and her electric bill this month. The answer, as always, was maybe. Her apartment building was in the kind of neighborhood that real estate agents called transitional, which meant it was affordable because it wasn't quite safe. The building itself was old brick, 5 stories, with a security door that hadn't locked properly in months. Amara climbed the front steps, juggling her backpack and her phone, checking her email for the 3rd time that hour to see if the translation agency had sent this week's payment. They hadn't. She almost didn't notice the car. It was parked directly in front of her building, a black Mercedes with tinted windows that reflected the streetlights like dark mirrors. The vehicle was so clean it seemed to repel the city's grime, so expensive it made everything around it look shabby by comparison. It didn't belong in this neighborhood any more than a diamond belonged in a gutter. Amara's steps slowed. Her training in threat assessment, the same training that helped her work with children in crisis, kicked in automatically. Wrong car, wrong location, wrong everything. Her hand tightened on her phone as she calculated whether she could make it inside the building and up to her 3rd-floor apartment before anyone in that car could reach her. The decision was taken from her. Both rear doors opened simultaneously, and 2 men stepped out with the kind of synchronized precision that spoke of professional training. They wore dark suits that fit too well to be off the rack, and their builds suggested they spent considerable time in gyms doing things more practical than looking good. One was tall and broad with Asian features, the other slightly shorter with a scar running through his left eyebrow. Both had the kind of alertness that said they noticed everything and forgot nothing. "Miss Thompson," the taller one said. It wasn't a question. Amara's heart kicked into a faster rhythm, adrenaline flooding her system. Her mouth went dry. She took a step back, weighing her options. She could run, but they were between her and the building entrance. She could scream, but this neighborhood had learned long ago that minding your own business kept you safe. "Who are you?" she managed, keeping her voice steady through force of will. "Mr. Park requests your presence," the man continued, his English perfect but accented. "He wishes to discuss an opportunity regarding a child you recently assisted." Amara's mind raced, trying to connect pieces that didn't make sense. Park. The name meant nothing to her. Child you assisted. That could only mean the boy at the plaza, the little one who'd been having a meltdown. But why would his family send 2 men who looked like they moonlighted as enforcers? "I don't know any Mr. Park," Amara said, still backing away slowly. "And I don't get into cars with strange men. If someone wants to discuss something with me, they can make an appointment during business hours." The second man, the one with the scar, spoke for the first time. His voice was surprisingly soft, almost apologetic. "Miss Thompson, we understand your concern. However, Mr. Park is not accustomed to being refused. The child you helped is his son. He would very much like to speak with you about a proposition that would be mutually beneficial." Amara's breath caught. His son, the beautiful boy with the dark eyes who'd reached for her hand. This Park person was his father. The coincidence of expensive car and professional security suddenly made more sense, though not in a way that made her feel safer. Wealthy, powerful, connected. Those qualities didn't usually translate to "I should definitely get in this car with strangers." "I appreciate the offer," Amara said, choosing words carefully, "but I'm not available tonight. If Mr. Park wants to speak with me, he can call me to arrange a meeting in a public place." The taller man's expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted slightly, a micro-adjustment that suggested patience wearing thin. "Miss Thompson," he said, his tone still professional but firmer, "this is not a negotiation. Mr. Park has information regarding your safety that requires immediate discussion. You are welcome to bring your phone, and you have our word that no harm will come to you. But we cannot leave without you." The words regarding your safety hit like ice water. Amara's stomach clenched. This wasn't a polite request anymore. This was a command wrapped in courtesy, and the subtext was clear. They weren't leaving without her, whether she cooperated or not. She looked at the car, then at the 2 men, then at her shabby apartment building. Every instinct screamed danger, but a deeper awareness whispered that these men, despite their intimidating presence, weren't the threat. They were too controlled, too professional. If they'd wanted to hurt her, she'd already be hurt. Whatever this Park wanted, it wasn't that. At least not yet. "Fine," Amara said, her voice harder than she felt. "But I'm keeping my phone, and if this turns out to be something other than what you're saying, I will make sure people know. The taller man nodded once, approval flickering in his eyes. Understood. Please. He gestured to the open car door. Amara walked forward on legs that felt disconnected from her brain, ducking into the back seat. The interior was exactly what she expected, leather that probably cost more per square inch than her monthly rent, subtle lighting, and a partition separating the front seats from the back. One of the men slid in beside her, while the other took the front passenger's seat. The doors closed with a solid sound that reminded her of a vault ceiling. The car pulled smoothly into traffic, heading north toward the neighborhoods Amara only saw when she tutored the children of wealthy families. She kept her hand on her phone in her lap, thumb hovering over the emergency call button, heart hammering against her ribs. The man beside her maintained a respectful distance, his attention apparently on his own phone, though she suspected he was acutely aware of her every movement. The drive took 20 minutes through increasingly expensive neighborhoods, where apartment buildings gave way to gated communities and the sidewalks actually looked clean. The car finally turned through an entrance flanked by stone pillars and a security gate that required facial recognition to open. Beyond the gate, a long driveway wound through manicured grounds lit by ground lighting that turned the landscaping into art. The estate that came into view made Amara's breath catch despite her fear. It wasn't the largest mansion she'd ever seen, but it was easily the most imposing, a modern structure of stone and glass that managed to look both beautiful and fortified. Security cameras were visible at regular intervals, and she counted at least 3 other men in dark clothing stationed at strategic points around the property. This wasn't just a home. This was a fortress pretending to be a residence. The car stopped beneath a covered entrance. The door opened, and the man beside her gestured politely. Miss Thompson. Amara stepped out into air that smelled like expensive landscaping and money. Her worn jacket and practical jeans felt like costume pieces in the wrong production. She followed the 2 men up wide stone steps to a massive front door that opened before they reached it, revealing a woman in her 50s wearing what Amara recognized as a housekeeper's uniform that probably cost more than Amara's entire wardrobe. Inside, the house was stunning in its cold elegance. High ceilings, minimal furniture that looked like modern art, floors that gleamed like dark mirrors. Everything was expensive, curated, perfect, and absolutely silent in a way that felt heavy, like the house itself was holding its breath. Mr. Park is in his study, the taller security man said. This way. They walked through corridors lined with art that looked original and valuable, past rooms glimpsed through open doors that suggested luxury Amara could barely comprehend. Finally, they stopped before a door of dark wood carved with subtle patterns. The man knocked once, waited, then opened the door and stood aside. Miss Thompson, he announced, then stepped back. Amara walked into the study on legs that had gone strangely numb. The room was exactly what she'd expected after seeing the rest of the house. Dark wood paneling, built-in bookshelves filled with leather-bound volumes, a massive desk that looked like it had been carved from a single piece of wood. Floor-to-ceiling windows along one wall showed the city spread out below, lights twinkling like grounded stars. And standing with his back to her, looking out at that view, was a man in a black suit who turned as she entered. Park Jin-woo in person was even more intimidating than he'd been from a distance at the plaza. Up close, Amara could see the sharp precision of his features, the controlled intensity in his dark eyes, the way he carried himself with absolute certainty of his own power. He was handsome in the way a blade was handsome, all clean lines and dangerous purpose. Everything about him radiated wealth and authority, from his perfectly tailored suit to the expensive watch on his wrist to the way he occupied space like he owned not just the room, but everything in it. Miss Thompson, he said, his voice low and smooth with just a hint of accent. Thank you for coming. Amara lifted her chin, refusing to be cowed despite her pounding heart. I didn't have much choice, she replied. Your men made it clear this wasn't optional. Something that might have been amusement flickered in Park's eyes. They can be persuasive when necessary. Please sit. He gestured to a leather chair positioned across from his desk. Amara remained standing. I'd prefer to stand, and I'd prefer to know why I was brought here. Park studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he moved to his desk, pressed something on his computer, and turned the monitor toward her. Security footage from the plaza 3 days ago. You helped a child having a meltdown. That child was my son, Miho. Amara's eyes widened slightly. Your son. Park nodded once, his gaze never leaving her face. He is 4 years old. He has autism. He is nonverbal, makes no eye contact, connects with no one. I have hired specialists from around the world, spent more money than most people see in a lifetime, and no one has been able to reach him. Then you appeared and spoke Korean to him, and he reached for your hand. He has never, in 4 years, reached for anyone. Not his nanny, not his therapists, not me. The raw honesty in that last admission hit Amara unexpectedly. She could hear the pain beneath the controlled words, the desperation of a father who couldn't connect with his own child. Her professional mind engaged despite her fear. He responded to the rhythm and predictability, she said quietly. And to Korean. There's often a neurological reason for language preference in autistic children. Park's eyes sharpened. You understand this condition. I'm completing my certification in child behavioral therapy, Amara said. My younger brother is autistic. I've been working with children on the spectrum for years. Park nodded slowly, as if she'd confirmed something he already knew. Of course. I had you investigated, Miss Thompson. I know about your brother, your education, your financial situation. I know you work 3 jobs to stay barely above water, that you have $80,000 in student loans, that you are 6 months from certification but have no guarantee of employment afterward. I know everything about you that matters. Amara's fear crystallized into anger. You investigated me. Of course, Park said simply, with no apology in his tone. I needed to understand who you were before I approached you with my proposition. But before we discuss that, there is something more immediate you need to know. He pressed another key on his computer, and the screen changed to show a series of photographs. Amara felt her blood turn cold. They were pictures of her, walking to tutoring sessions, sitting in the library, entering her apartment building, all taken from a distance over the past 3 days. Someone has been watching you, Park said, his voice matter-of-fact. Not my people. These are surveillance photos taken by an unknown party. Your apartment has also been monitored. Someone installed a camera across the street 2 days ago, focused on your building entrance. Amara's hand went to her throat, her breathing suddenly difficult. Why, she managed. Why would anyone watch me? Park's expression hardened, his eyes going cold in a way that made him look genuinely dangerous. Because they saw what I saw. You calmed my son when no one else could. In my world, Miss Thompson, that makes you valuable. And in my world, valuable things get noticed. They get watched. They get taken. Who are they? Amara asked, her voice shaking now despite her best efforts. Rivals, Park said simply. People who would love to discover I have a weakness, something they could leverage against me. My son's existence is not widely known. I've kept him protected, hidden. But you created a public spectacle, and people who make it their business to watch me were watching. They don't know who you are yet, but they're trying to find out. Amara's legs suddenly felt unreliable. She sank into the leather chair she'd refused earlier, her mind spinning. This wasn't real. This couldn't be real. She'd helped a child, done what any decent person with her training would do, and now she was being watched by dangerous people because some crime boss considered her valuable. Park moved from behind his desk, his presence overwhelming as he came closer. He didn't sit, instead leaning back against the desk edge, looking down at her with those dark, calculating eyes. I can protect you, Miss Thompson. But first, we need to discuss terms. Amara looked up at him, trapped between terror and disbelief. Terms. Park's expression didn't change. You have something I need. I have resources you need. This is a negotiation, though I should be clear that refusing is not in your best interest. Your safety is already compromised. The only question is whether you accept my protection along with my employment, or whether you attempt to manage this threat on your own. The room felt too small suddenly, the air too thin. Amara's heart was hammering so hard she could hear it in her ears. She was trapped, caught in a nightmare that had started with an act of kindness and spiraled into something she couldn't control. What do you want from me? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Park's eyes held hers, intense and unwavering. I want you to do for my son what you did at the plaza. I want you to reach him, to help him connect to the world. I want you to give him what all my money and power cannot buy. And in exchange, Amara asked, though she already knew she had no real choice. In exchange, Park said, his voice dropping lower, more intimate. I will eliminate your debt, fund your certification, pay you more than you could earn in 5 years of traditional work, and most importantly, I will ensure that no one ever threatens you again. He straightened, moving back to his desk, giving her space to breathe. But we will discuss details later. Tonight, you simply need to understand your situation. Someone is watching you. They don't know your value yet, but they will. And when they do, they will act. What do they want? Amara asked, though part of her didn't want to know the answer. Park's expression went cold, dangerous in a way that made Amara remember exactly who she was dealing with. In my world, Miss Thompson, leverage is everything. If they discover you can reach my son, they will try to take you. They will use you to control me, and they will not be gentle about it. Amara's hands were shaking now, trembling in her lap despite her attempts to control them. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. Park seemed to read her thoughts. I understand this is overwhelming, but I need you to focus. Tomorrow morning, you will receive a phone call with a formal offer. You will have 24 hours to make your decision. Choose to accept, and you will be moved to a secure location immediately with full protection. Choose to refuse, and I will provide security for 72 hours while you make alternative arrangements, though I cannot guarantee your safety beyond that point. He moved to the door, opening it to reveal the two security men waiting outside. My men will drive you home. You will notice additional security around your building tonight. Those are my people, ensuring your immediate safety. Sleep on what I've told you. Consider your options carefully. Amara stood on unsteady legs, her mind still reeling. This was insane. All of it. But the photographs on his computer screen were real. The surveillance was real. And the danger in Park Jinwa's eyes when he talked about rivals was absolutely, terrifyingly real. She walked to the door, then paused, looking back at him. Your son, she said quietly. Miho. He deserves better than to be a bargaining chip in whatever world you live in. Park's expression flickered, something that might have been pain crossing his features before his control reasserted itself. Yes, he agreed. He does. Which is why I need you to help him before my world destroys what little innocence he has left. The drive back to her apartment passed in a blur of streetlights and racing thoughts. The security men were silent, professional, and Amara was grateful not to have to speak. Her mind was spinning too fast for conversation, trying to process impossible information and make sense of choices that felt like no choice at all. When the car stopped in front of her building, the taller man turned to look at her. Additional security will be stationed nearby tonight, Miss Thompson. You're safe. And for what it's worth, Mr. Park is a man of his word. If he promises protection, you have it. Amara climbed out of the car without responding, walking up the steps to her building in a daze. Inside her small apartment, she locked the door, threw the deadbolt, and stood in her tiny living room looking at the space that had been her home for 2 years. Everything looked the same. The worn furniture, the stack of textbooks, the bills piled on her kitchen counter. But everything had changed. She'd been seen, marked, made valuable by an accident of timing and language. And now she had to choose between impossible danger and a different kind of danger wrapped in promises of safety. She walked to her window, looking down at the street below. Sure enough, there was now a dark sedan parked across from her building, 2 figures visible in the front seats. Park's men, watching her because somewhere out there, someone else was watching too. Amara pressed her forehead against the cool glass, exhaustion and fear and disbelief all warring in her chest. 72 hours ago, her biggest problem had been deciding which bill to pay late. Now she was caught in something she didn't understand, threatened by people she couldn't see, and being offered protection by a man who was clearly dangerous in his own right. She thought of the little boy at the plaza, Miho, with his beautiful dark eyes and his desperate isolation. She thought of his father's voice when he said his son had never reached for anyone. She thought of $80,000 in debt and 3 jobs that were slowly killing her and a future that looked exactly like her present, grinding and exhausting and endless. And she thought of the surveillance photos, of strangers watching her movements, of Park's cold certainty that valuable things got taken. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. Tomorrow morning at 9, a formal offer will be presented. Consider carefully, Miss Thompson. Your decision affects more than just yourself now. Amara set the phone down with shaking hands and sank onto her worn couch. Outside her window, the security sedan remained in place. Park's men ensuring her safety for a night. But what happened tomorrow? What happened when she had to choose? That was a different question entirely. She'd helped a child because it was the right thing to do. Now that simple act of kindness had trapped her in a world where kindness was weakness and value was measured in leverage and threats. She was 24 years old, exhausted, broke, and scared. And somewhere across the city, in a fortress disguised as a home, Park Jin-woo was waiting for her answer, confident that she would choose survival over principle. The worst part was, he was probably right. Amara didn't sleep. She lay in her bed watching shadows move across her ceiling, listening to the sounds of the city filtering through her thin windows, thinking about surveillance cameras and dangerous strangers and a little boy who'd reached for her hand. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw those photographs on Park's computer screen, images of herself going about her life, while unknown people watched and waited. At 7 in the morning, she gave up pretending sleep was possible. She made coffee with hands that had finally stopped shaking, showered in her cramped bathroom, and dressed in the closest thing she had to professional clothing, black slacks and a cream-colored blouse. If she was going to make a decision that would change her life, she wanted to look like someone capable of making decisions, not a terrified girl who'd stumbled into something beyond her understanding. The phone call came precisely at 9 o'clock, the same unknown number from last night. Amara stared at the screen for 3 rings before answering. Miss Thompson, Park Jin-woo's voice was as controlled and commanding over the phone as it had been in person. I trust you slept well. That's a lie and you know it, Amara replied, too tired for politeness. A sound that might have been amusement. Fair enough. My car will arrive for you in 30 minutes. We have much to discuss, and I prefer these conversations to happen face to face. The line clicked off before she could respond. Amara set the phone down and closed her eyes, taking 3 deep breaths the way she'd taught countless anxious children. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Focus on the physical sensation. It helped marginally. 29 minutes later, the black Mercedes pulled up outside her building. The same 2 security men, the same professional courtesy, the same ride through increasingly expensive neighborhoods. But this time, Amara's fear had been joined by something else, a strange fatalistic calm. She was walking toward her future, whatever that looked like, and fighting it felt like fighting a riptide. Sometimes survival meant letting the current carry you and hoping you ended up on shore. Park was waiting for her in his study, dressed in another perfectly tailored suit, this one charcoal gray that made his dark eyes look almost black. The morning light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows turned the room into something from a magazine. All clean lines and expensive taste. He gestured to the same leather chair as last night. This time, Amara sat without arguing. Park settled behind his desk, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp and focused. He slid a leather portfolio across the desk toward her. Inside that folder is a formal contract outlining the terms of employment I'm offering. But before you read legal language, I want to explain in plain terms what I'm proposing. Amara's hands folded in her lap, her back straight, her expression carefully neutral. I'm listening. Park's gaze held hers, direct and unwavering. My son needs you. That is the simple truth beneath all the complicated details. He is 4 years old and he lives in a world I cannot access, cannot understand, cannot help him navigate. You have a gift, Miss Thompson, whether you recognize it as such or not. You reached him in 3 minutes when specialists failed in years. I need that gift. He leaned forward slightly, his intensity increasing. Here is what I'm offering. First, financial compensation. $150,000 per year, paid monthly, deposited directly into an account I'll establish for you. Second, your student loans, all $80,000, will be paid in full immediately upon your acceptance. You'll receive confirmation within 24 hours. Third, full funding for your behavioral therapy certification, any additional training you want, any conferences or programs that advance your skills. No expense limit. Amara's breath caught. That was more money than she'd see in 5 years of normal employment, more than she'd dreamed of having. The student loans alone, gone, just erased like they'd never existed. Park continued, his voice steady and businesslike. Living arrangements. You'll have a private suite on the 2nd floor of this estate. Bedroom, bathroom, sitting room, small kitchenette. Fully furnished, but you're welcome to personalize it. You'll have complete access to the estate grounds, the library, the gym, any amenity you need. What about my current apartment? Amara asked, her voice steadier than she felt. You can keep it. Terminate the lease. Your choice, Park said. I'll handle any remaining rent obligation if you want to break the lease. I'll also cover moving costs for anything you want transferred here. Park pulled out a thin folder, opening it to show a detailed list. Your daily responsibilities. You'll work with Miho each morning from 8 to noon. Therapy, play, language development, whatever methods you determine are most effective. Afternoons are yours for documentation, research, or personal time. 3 evenings per week. You'll join us for dinner, so Miho has additional social interaction. Weekends have morning sessions only. And when I'm not with Miho, Amara asked. Your time is your own, Park replied. Study, rest, pursue your own interests. This is not indentured servitude, Miss Thompson. I'm hiring your professional expertise, not purchasing your life. But living here means I'm always available, Amara pointed out. Park nodded once. Yes, emergencies happen. If Miho has a crisis at 2 in the morning, I need to know you're accessible. That's the trade-off for the compensation and benefits. Availability in exchange for security and financial freedom. He closed the folder and met her eyes with an intensity that made the room feel smaller. Now let me be clear about expectations and consequences. I require 3 things from you. First, absolute discretion. You don't discuss my business, my family, or anything you see or hear in this house with anyone outside these walls. Second, unwavering loyalty. You work for me and Miho. Your priority is his well-being and safety above all else. Third, you live here on the estate grounds. This is not negotiable. Your safety requires secure location and constant protection. Amara's stomach tightened. And if I violate these terms? Park's expression hardened, his voice dropping into something colder. If you breach confidentiality, if you betray my trust, if you do anything that compromises Miho's safety or puts my family at risk, the arrangement ends immediately. All benefits revoke. The loans I paid become due again. And you return to your previous situation without my protection. I am generous to those who serve me well, Miss Thompson, but I am absolute about disloyalty. The threat hung in the air between them, clear and unmistakable. Amara forced herself to hold his gaze. You're asking me to give up my independence, my freedom to come and go, my entire life, in exchange for money and safety. I'm asking you to trade an illusion of independence for actual security, Park corrected. You're drowning in debt, working yourself to exhaustion, one emergency away from complete financial collapse. That's not freedom, that's survival. I'm offering you the resources to build a real future while doing meaningful work with my son. The restrictions are real, but so are the benefits. Amara looked down at the leather portfolio on the desk. Everything he said was true. She was barely surviving, had been barely surviving for 2 years, with no end in sight. This offer was more money, more security, more opportunity than she'd ever imagined having. But it came wrapped in control, in restrictions, in living under the authority of a man who was clearly dangerous despite his civilized exterior. What exactly is your business, Mr. Park? She asked, looking up at him. You said imports and investments. What does that actually mean? Park's expression didn't change. I handle imports of various goods through shipping networks I control. I also invest in real estate development and business ventures. Some of my methods are unconventional. Some of my associates are people you wouldn't want to meet at a dinner party. I operate in gray areas of law and sometimes beyond those areas. Does that answer your question? You're telling me you're a criminal, Amara said bluntly. I'm telling you I'm a businessman who doesn't let legal constraints stop me from being effective, Park replied. I don't sell drugs. I don't traffic humans. I don't prey on the weak. But I do use force when necessary. I do control territory, and I do have enemies who would hurt me through my family if given the opportunity. If that makes me a criminal in your eyes, so be it. Amara's hands tightened in her lap. And you want me to live in that world, to be part of it. I want you to help my son, Park said quietly, and for the first time, she heard something other than control in his voice. Something that sounded like desperation. I want you safe while you do it. Everything else is context. Why me? Amara asked. You could find other therapists, people with more experience, more credentials. Because Miho reached for you, Park said simply. In 4 years, he's never initiated contact with another human being. Not once. Then you appeared, and he reached out. That's not training, Miss Thompson. That's connection. And connection is what my son needs more than credentials or experience. Amara stared at the leather portfolio, her mind spinning through competing thoughts and emotions. This was insane. Taking money from a crime boss, living in his fortress, becoming part of his world. Every rational part of her brain screamed no, screamed danger, screamed that this was a cage disguised as opportunity. But another part of her, the part that had worked 3 jobs for 2 years while watching her debt grow instead of shrink, the part that was so tired she could barely remember what rested felt like, that part whispered yes. Whispered that survival required compromise, that ideals were expensive luxuries she couldn't afford. Can I see him? Amara asked. Miho. Before I decide, I want to see him again. Park stood immediately. Of course. He led her through the house to the 2nd floor, down a corridor decorated with subtle elegance, to a door painted soft blue. Park opened it quietly, and Amara followed him into what was clearly Miho's room. The space was beautiful in its thoughtfulness. Not overwhelming, not cluttered, but carefully designed for a child with sensory sensitivities. Soft colors, natural light filtered through sheer curtains, organized shelves with toys and books arranged with clear visual order. In the center of the room, on a soft mat, sat the little boy from the plaza. Miho was playing with wooden blocks, stacking them in precise patterns, then knocking them down and starting again. He was focused, absorbed, existing in his own world. He didn't look up when they entered, didn't acknowledge their presence. Amara's heart squeezed. He was so small, so isolated, locked in patterns and repetition because connection was too overwhelming, too unpredictable. She knew this isolation intimately from her brother, understood the desperate loneliness of a mind that couldn't bridge the gap between internal experience and external expression. She knelt on the floor several feet from Miho, not approaching, just creating a presence. Then she started humming, the same Korean children's song she'd used at the plaza, soft and repetitive and predictable. Miho's hands stilled on the blocks. His head tilted slightly, not looking at her, but listening. Amara kept humming, the melody weaving through the quiet room. Then she spoke in Korean, her voice gentle. Annyeong Minho. Hello, Miho. Kiake. Do you remember me? Miho's dark eyes lifted slowly, tracking across the floor until they found her. The contact lasted only a second before sliding away, but it was there. Recognition, maybe. Memory, certainly. Nanin, Amara continued. I'm Amara. Nanin, I'm here. Miho's hand reached out slowly, pushing a wooden block across the mat toward her. It was a small gesture, barely noticeable, but Amara understood its meaning. Invitation. Connection. He was reaching out in the only way he could. Amara's eyes burned with sudden tears. She picked up the block gently, placing it back near Miho. Guma, she said softly. Thank you. Behind her, she heard Park's sharp intake of breath. When she finally stood and turned to leave the room, his expression had transformed from controlled businessman to something raw and unguarded. There was hope on his face, naked and desperate, and painful to witness. In the hallway, Park closed Miho's door quietly. You see now, he said, his voice rougher than before. You see what he needs. Amara nodded, unable to speak around the emotion clogging her throat. She did see. She saw a little boy who wanted to connect, but didn't have the tools, who was trapped in isolation not by choice, but by neurology. She saw a father who had unlimited resources, but couldn't buy what his son needed most. And she saw her own reflection, someone who could build that bridge if given the chance. They returned to the study in silence. Park moved to the windows, giving her space, giving her time. Amara stood in the center of the room, the leather portfolio still sitting on the desk, unopened but present. She thought about her grandmother, who had worked 2 jobs to help pay for Amara's education, who had believed education was the path to freedom. She thought about her brother, who had taught her that love meant understanding, meant patience, meant showing up even when connection seemed impossible. She thought about debt and exhaustion and a future that looked exactly like her present, grinding and endless. And she thought about Miho pushing a block toward her, that tiny gesture of trust from a child who trusted no one. Maybe morality was a luxury she couldn't afford. Maybe taking money from a criminal was wrong in some abstract sense. But leaving that child locked in isolation when she could help him, that felt more wrong. And continuing to drown financially while telling herself she was maintaining principles. What principle was that serving? She looked at Park, still standing at the windows with his back to her, giving her the illusion of privacy for this moment. "What's the timeline?" she asked. "If I accept, when would I start?" Park turned, his expression carefully neutral, but his eyes sharp with attention. "You would move in this weekend. We'd begin sessions with Miho on Monday. Your loans would be paid by close of business tomorrow. Your first month's salary would be deposited immediately as a sign of good faith." "And if I refuse?" Amara asked, though she already knew her answer. "Then I provide security for 72 hours while you make alternative arrangements," Park said quietly. "I won't leave you unprotected. But I also can't force you to accept employment you don't want." Amara walked to the desk, looking down at the leather portfolio. Her hand hovered over it, trembling slightly. This was the moment. The choice that would define everything that came after. Safety versus unknown danger. Security versus independence. Survival versus principle. She picked up the portfolio, opening it to scan the formal legal language that matched everything Park had explained. The numbers were there in black and white. 150,000. 80,000. Benefits, responsibilities, terms, consequences. All spelled out with corporate precision. She closed the portfolio and met Park's eyes. "I have questions about specific therapy approaches, about what's been tried before, about Miho's full history and assessments." Park's expression shifted, something that might have been relief flickering across his features. "I have all documentation ready for your review. We can spend this afternoon going through everything." Amara took a breath, the deepest breath she'd taken since entering this house. "I accept your offer, Mr. Park. I'll work with Miho. I'll live here. I'll follow your rules about discretion and loyalty. And in exchange, you'll provide everything you've promised." She extended her hand across the desk. "We have an agreement." Park moved forward, taking her hand in a grip that was firm and warm and surprisingly gentle for someone who had threatened her so clearly minutes earlier. "We have an agreement," he confirmed. "Welcome to my home, Miss Thompson." He released her hand and picked up his phone from the desk, pressing a single button. "Miss Chen, please come to my study." Park ended the call and looked at Amara with something that might have been satisfaction. "Miss Chen is Miho's current nanny. She'll be reassigned to other duties, but I'd like you to speak with her about Miho's routines and triggers before she transitions out." The door opened to reveal a Korean woman in her 50s, professional and polished. This was the nanny from the plaza, Amara realized. The one who had been panicking during Miho's meltdown. "Miss Chun," Park said, "this is Amara Thompson. She'll be taking over Miho's primary care as his private therapist and caregiver. Please provide her with any information that will help her transition into the role." Miss Chin's eyes widened slightly as she recognized Amara. Then her expression transformed into something like relief. "Oh, thank God. After what I saw at the plaza, I was hoping Mr. Park would find you. That boy needs you. He's never responded to anyone the way he responded to you." Amara felt the weight of responsibility settle onto her shoulders. She'd made her choice. She'd accepted the arrangement. And now she had to prove she could deliver on the promise that had brought her here, that she could reach a child everyone else had failed to help. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of information. Medical records, therapy assessments, daily schedules, dietary preferences, sensory triggers. Miss Chun walked Amara through 4 years of attempts to connect with Miho, for years of small failures and frustrated hope. She showed Amara the therapy room, the sensory space designed for regulation, the outdoor play area built with Miho's needs in mind. By evening, Amara's head was spinning with information and her heart was heavy with the magnitude of what she'd taken on. Park found her in the library, staring at a wall of books without seeing them. "Your suite is ready," he said quietly. "My staff can help you pack your apartment this weekend, or you can do it yourself with security escort. Your choice." "I'll do it myself," Amara replied. "With escort. I need to process this, and packing will help." Park nodded. "Reasonable. His driver will pick you up Saturday morning at 9. He paused, then added, "You made the right choice, Miss Thompson. For yourself and for my son." Amara turned to look at him. This dangerous man who had threatened and promised in equal measure, who had investigated her and offered her salvation. I hope you're right, Mr. Park, because I just traded everything I had for everything you promised. And if you're lying about any of it, I have nothing left to fall back on. Park's expression hardened, his eyes going cold and absolute. I don't lie about my word, Miss Thompson. When I make a promise, I keep it. You'll learn that about me. He gestured toward the door. Come, I'll have you driven home. You have 2 days to prepare for your new life. The drive back to her apartment felt surreal, like she was watching her own life from a distance. Amara stared out the tinted windows at the city passing by, at the neighborhoods transforming from wealthy to working class, from security to vulnerability. By Monday, this journey would become routine, this impossible commute between two different worlds. Inside her apartment, everything looked smaller somehow, shabbier, more temporary. This had been her home, her independence, her proof that she could survive on her own terms. Now it was just a place she used to live, already relegated to her past. She sat on her worn couch and pulled out her phone, opening her loan servicer's website. $80,000. The number that had haunted her for 2 years. By tomorrow night, if Park kept his word, that number would be 0. She thought about calling her grandmother, about explaining what she'd done, but the words wouldn't form. How did you tell someone who believed in doing things the right way that you just accepted employment from a crime boss? How did you explain that survival sometimes required compromise, that principle was expensive when you were drowning? Instead, she opened her laptop and started a list. Things to pack, things to leave, things to figure out before her life changed completely. The mundane details of transformation reduced to boxes and tasks. Outside her window, Park's security sedan remained in place, 2 men keeping watch over her last 2 nights of independence. Come Monday morning, she would wake up in a mansion, in a suite larger than this entire apartment, with a child depending on her and a dangerous man expecting results. She'd walked into that study expecting to refuse, expecting to find some way to maintain her autonomy despite the threats and the offers. But she'd seen Miho reaching out with his wooden block, and she'd remembered what connection looked like when it finally broke through isolation. And she'd made the only choice that made sense. She'd traded her freedom for security, her independence for purpose, her normal life for something she couldn't even define yet. And somewhere across the city, Park Jinwoo was probably satisfied that things had gone exactly as he'd planned, that valuable assets always chose survival over principle. The worst part was, he was right. And come Monday morning, Amara would start living with the consequences of that truth. 3 weeks into her new life, Amara woke to sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows instead of the dim gray light that had filtered through her old apartment's single narrow window. The suite Park had provided was larger than her entire previous living space, decorated in soft neutrals with touches of warmth that suggested someone had actually thought about comfort rather than just expense. The bed was obscenely comfortable, the kind that made waking up feel like a betrayal of luxury. The bathroom had heated floors and a shower with water pressure that felt like a massage. Every detail whispered wealth in a way that still made Amara's stomach clench with disbelief. She'd moved in 3 weeks ago with 2 suitcases and a box of books, everything she owned fitting easily into the walk-in closet that was meant to hold a socialite's wardrobe. Park staff had been professionally courteous, showing her how everything worked, explaining meal times and house rules and security protocols. They'd treated her with a careful respect that fell somewhere between employee and family member, like they weren't quite sure what category she occupied but knew she mattered to their employer. The first few days had been overwhelming, learning the rhythms of a house that functioned like a well-oiled machine, understanding the boundaries and expectations. But slowly, surprisingly, Amara had found herself settling into a routine that felt less like captivity and more like purpose. Mornings belonged to Miho. 8 o'clock found her in his therapy room, a space she'd redesigned in the first week to better serve his needs. She'd removed half the toys that cluttered his visual field, organized the remaining items in clear bins with picture labels, created distinct areas for different activities. Structure and predictability. Those were the foundations of helping a child navigate overwhelming sensory input. Miho had responded immediately. The meltdowns that Miss Chun had described as daily occurrences had dropped to maybe 1 per week. He was making eye contact more often, holding it for 2 or 3 seconds before looking away. He was beginning to use simple Korean words, just a handful, but each one felt like a miracle. More water. Dough more. Mama, spoken so softly it was barely a breath, but always directed at Amara. That word, mama, broke her heart every single time. She wasn't his mother. His mother was dead, gone before Miho ever had a chance to know her. But Amara was the closest thing he had, the voice that soothed him, the presence that made his overwhelming world feel manageable. And she'd learned to accept that role with all its complicated emotions. Afternoons were for documentation and research. Amara would retreat to the library, a room that had quickly become her favorite space in the house. 2 stories of built-in shelves filled with books in multiple languages, comfortable chairs positioned near windows, and a silence that felt thick and peaceful. She'd document Miho's progress in detailed notes, research new therapeutic approaches, and slowly work on the coursework for her certification that Park had promised to fund. True to his word, her student loans had been paid in full within 24 hours of her acceptance. Amara had logged into her account expecting to see the familiar crushing number and instead found zero balance. Paid in full by anonymous benefactor. She'd sat staring at that screen for 10 minutes, tears streaming down her face, unable to process that the weight she'd carried for 2 years was simply gone. The first month's salary had appeared in a new account Park established for her, 150,000 divided by 12, deposited with casual efficiency. More money in one payment than she'd made in 6 months of her previous life. She hadn't spent any of it yet, just watched it sit in the account like proof that this impossible arrangement was real. But it was the evenings that had surprised her most. 3 nights a week, as Park had specified in their agreement, Amara joined him and Miho for dinner. She'd expected these meals to be formal, uncomfortable, a professional obligation. Instead, they'd become something else entirely. Park was different with his son than he was in his study conducting business or speaking with his security team. The cold control softened, the dangerous edge dulled into something gentler. He would cut Miho's food into precise small pieces, knowing without asking that the boy couldn't handle irregular shapes. He would narrate what he was doing in Korean, even though Miho rarely responded, creating a predictable vocal pattern. He would show endless patience when Miho needed to arrange his plate in a specific way before eating, never rushing, never showing frustration. And with Amara, Park was unexpectedly easy company. He asked about her day with genuine interest, listened to her descriptions of Miho's progress with an intensity that bordered on hunger. He talked about his own work in vague terms that suggested import shipments and real estate negotiations, but never crossed into explicit criminality. He was intelligent, well-read, capable of discussing everything from literature to politics to the philosophy of childhood development. Amara found herself looking forward to those dinners, found herself watching Park when he wasn't looking at her, studying the contrast between the dangerous businessman and the devoted father. She was beginning to understand that he was both things simultaneously, that the same capacity for ruthless control that made him feared also made him capable of the incredible patience required to parent a child like Miho. Staff had started treating her differently too, with warmth replacing the initial professional distance. The housekeeper, Mrs. Kim, had started bringing her tea in the afternoons without being asked. The chef consulted with her about Miho's food preferences and reactions. Park's head of security, the tall man named Kwan who had first collected her from her apartment, now nodded respectfully when they passed in the halls and had mentioned that his own nephew was autistic, that he was grateful someone finally understood Miho's needs. It was all too easy, Amara thought sometimes, lying in her comfortable bed in her beautiful suite. Too easy to forget that this was bought safety, that she'd traded independence for comfort, that the man who paid her salary was someone who solved problems with force and threats. Too easy to forget that she was living in a fortress because there were people outside who might hurt her given the chance. But then she'd spend a morning with Miho and watch him smile at her, really smile with his eyes crinkling, and she'd remember why she was here. Purpose. This child needed her, and she could help him, and that mattered more than the complicated ethics of who paid her to do it. On a Thursday evening, 3 weeks and 2 days after moving in, Amara was in the library writing up her daily notes when Park found her. She looked up from her laptop to find him standing in the doorway, still in his suit, but with his tie loosened and the top button of his shirt undone. He looked tired in a way she hadn't seen before, the controls slightly frayed at the edges. "May I come in?" he asked, which was unnecessary since it was his house, his library, his everything. "Of course," Amara said, closing her laptop. "Is something wrong with Miho?" Park shook his head, crossing to the bar cart positioned near the windows. "No. He's sleeping. I just put him down. He asked for you before he fell asleep." He said. "He wanted to make sure you'd be here in the morning." Amara's chest tightened. "I'll always be here in the morning. That's the arrangement." Park poured 2 fingers of amber liquid into a crystal glass, then paused and looked at her. "Do you drink whiskey, Miss Thompson?" "Sometimes," Amara replied. "And you can call me Amara." "Miss Thompson feels strange after 3 weeks of living in your house." Park's mouth quirked slightly, something that might have been a smile. "Amara, then. And you should call me Jinwoo. Mr. Park is what my employees call me. And you're—" He paused, searching for the word. "More than that." He poured a second glass and brought both to where she sat, handing her one before settling into the leather chair across from her. The library felt different in the evening light, shadows gathering in the corners, the silence heavier and more intimate. "You've done remarkable work with him, Park," Jinwoo said quietly. 3 weeks, and he's more present, more connected than I've seen in months. Years, maybe. You were right to accept this position. "I hope so," Amara replied, taking a small sip of the whiskey. It burned pleasantly, expensive and smooth. "I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, for this to reveal itself as too good to be true." Jinwoo studied her over the rim of his glass, his dark eyes unreadable. "You don't trust easily. That's wise, given your circumstances. Given my reputation. Should I trust you?" Amara asked, surprising herself with the directness. Jinwoo was quiet for a long moment, his gaze drifting to the windows where the city lights spread below them like scattered stars. "Eventually, yes. I think you should. But I understand that trust is earned through consistency, not promises." Amara set her glass down on the side table, leaning forward slightly. "Can I ask you something?" "About Miho." "Anything," Jinwoo said. "Why does he respond to Korean specifically?" Miss Chun said he was exposed to multiple languages, but Korean is the only one that really reaches him. Jinwoo's expression shifted, something painful flickering across his features before his control reasserted itself. He took a long drink of his whiskey, then set the glass aside with careful precision. His mother, Yuna, only spoke Korean to him during her pregnancy. He paused, searching for words. She was convinced that babies could hear in the womb, that they developed preferences and recognition before birth. She would sing to him every night, Korean lullabies her own mother had sung to her. She would read children's books in Korean, would speak to him constantly, telling him about the world he'd be born into. Jinwoo's voice had gone rough, emotion bleeding through despite his obvious attempts at control. She was certain he could hear her voice, that when he was born he would recognize her and feel safe, because she'd been his constant companion for 9 months. "She made me promise that we'd speak Korean at home, that our son would grow up bilingual, but that Korean would be his first language, his mother tongue in the most literal sense." Amara's heart was already aching, knowing how this story ended. "What happened?" she asked gently. "Complications during delivery," Jinwoo said flatly. "Placental abruption. She started hemorrhaging and they couldn't stop it. I was across the city handling a shipment dispute, something that felt important at the time. By the time I got to the hospital, she was already gone and Miho was in the NICU fighting to breathe." His hands tightened on the arms of the chair, knuckles going white. "She died never holding him, never seeing him. He was supposed to hear her voice when he was born, recognize her, feel safe. Instead, he heard machines and strangers and his own crying." The pain in Jinwoo's voice was raw, unguarded in a way Amara had never heard from him. She watched his jaw tighten, watched him fight for the control he'd spent years perfecting. "Miho survived," Jinwoo continued, "but he wasn't like other babies. He didn't make eye contact, didn't respond to voices, didn't seek comfort. As he grew, the specialists told me he had autism, that his development would be different, that connection might always be difficult for him. But I've always wondered," his voice cracked slightly, "if part of it is that he's waiting for her voice, the voice he heard for 9 months. Waiting for his mother to come and make the world make sense." Amara's eyes were burning with tears she refused to let fall. "That's why he responds to Korean," she said softly. It's the language he was born expecting to hear. It's the sound of safety he learned before he ever took a breath. Jinwoo nodded, his control visibly fracturing. Then you appeared, speaking Korean, using her soft tone, the rhythm and melody she would have used. And he recognized something. Maybe not consciously, but somewhere deep in his neurology, you sound like what his mother should have sounded like. He looked at Amara then, his dark eyes shining with emotion he could no longer hide. You gave him back his mother's voice. You gave him the connection he's been waiting 4 years to find. Amara couldn't stop the tears now. They slid down her cheeks as she absorbed the weight of what Jinwoo was saying. The impossible grief of a child who'd lost his mother before ever meeting her. The father who lived with the guilt of not being there when it mattered most. I couldn't save her, Jinwoo said, his voice barely above a whisper. I failed to be there when it counted. I built this empire, accumulated all this power and money, and none of it mattered when she needed me. And then Miho was born into this world without her, and I couldn't reach him either. Every specialist I hired, every therapy I funded, nothing worked. He just stayed locked away, unreachable. Jinwoo stood abruptly, moving to the windows, his back to Amara as he fought for composure. I started believing he'd never connect with anyone, that I'd failed him the same way I failed her, that he'd grow up alone in his own mind because I couldn't give him what he needed. Amara stood and walked to where he stood, stopping beside him but not touching. You didn't fail him, she said firmly. You've been here every single day. You've given him stability, safety, every resource possible. That's not failure. Jinwoo turned to look at her, and Amara could see the tears tracking down his cheeks now, the absolute surrender of control. But I couldn't reach him. I'm his father, and I couldn't reach my own son. Until I could, Amara said gently. And I'm only here because you found me, because you made this possible. You gave him the chance to connect by bringing me into his life. Jinwoo's hand reached up, his fingers brushing away the tears on her cheek with unexpected gentleness. You've given me hope I buried 4 years ago. You've shown me that my son can connect, that he's not lost, just waiting for the right voice. He's not lost, Amara agreed. He's here. He's reaching out. And he's going to keep growing because you've given him the support he needs. They stood there in the fading light, too close now, the air between them charged with emotion and something else Amara didn't want to name. Jinwoo's hand was still on her cheek, warm and careful, and she found herself leaning into the touch without conscious decision. I'm not a good man, Amara, Jinwoo said quietly, his voice rough with emotion. I've done terrible things. I've hurt people. I operate in darkness and call it business. You should probably be afraid of me. I know, Amara replied. I know what you are. But I also see who you are with your son. I see how you cut his food and speak Korean even when he doesn't respond. I see how you read to him every night, even though he doesn't seem to listen. I see a man who loves his child more than anything and would burn the world down to keep him safe. Jinwoo's other hand came up, framing her face, his dark eyes searching hers. With you here, watching you with Miho, seeing you make this house feel less like a fortress and more like a home. I remember there's more to life than power and control. You make me want to be better than what I am. You are better than what you think you are, Amara whispered. You just hide it behind control and danger. Maybe, Jinwoo said. Or maybe I'm exactly as dark as I believe, and you're the light that makes it bearable. His thumb traced along her cheekbone, a touch that was intimate and careful and heavy with meaning. Amara's heart was racing now, her breath shallow, caught between professional boundaries and something that felt much more dangerous than simple attraction. This isn't part of our arrangement, she managed to say. No, Jinwoo agreed. This is something else entirely. He leaned closer, close enough that Amara could feel his breath against her lips, could see the gold flecks in his dark eyes, could feel the heat radiating from his body. Everything in her was screaming that this was complicated, that crossing this line would change everything, that she was already in too deep without adding this to the equation. But she didn't step back, didn't move away. Instead, she tilted her face up slightly, an invitation or surrender, she wasn't sure which. Jinwoo's lips brushed hers, featherlight, testing. Amara's eyes closed, her hands coming up to rest against his chest, where she could feel his heart hammering as hard as her own. He kissed her again, deeper this time, his hands sliding into her hair, and Amara let herself fall into it, into the warmth and want and the feeling of being seen, really seen, by someone who understood darkness and chose gentleness anyway. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Jinwoo rested his forehead against hers. "This complicates things," he murmured. "Everything about this has been complicated from the start," Amara replied. "Fair point," Jinwoo said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. He stepped back, giving her space, running a hand through his hair in a gesture that suggested he was as off balance as she felt. "I should let you get back to your work. And I should maintain some semblance of professional boundaries before I completely lose perspective." Amara nodded, though her body was protesting the distance. Probably wise. But Jinwoo didn't leave immediately. He stood there looking at her, his expression softer than she'd ever seen it. "Thank you, Amara, for what you're doing for Miho. For what you've done for me without even realizing it. For being exactly who you are." "I'm just trying to help," Amara said. Jinwoo's smile was small but genuine. "You're doing more than that. You're saving us both." He left then, walking out of the library with his usual controlled grace, though Amara noticed his hand trembled slightly as he pulled the door closed behind him. She stood alone in the darkening room, her fingers touching her lips, her heart still racing, her mind trying to process what had just happened. She'd come here for a job, for safety, for the chance to help a child who needed her expertise. She hadn't expected to care about Park Jinwoo, to see past his danger to the broken man underneath who was doing his best with impossible grief. She hadn't expected to feel this pull, this connection that went beyond professional respect into something that felt terrifyingly like the beginning of love. Amara returned to her chair and picked up her whiskey glass with shaking hands, taking a long drink that burned all the way down. 3 weeks ago, she'd been drowning in debt and exhaustion. Now she was living in a mansion, helping a beautiful child learn to connect, and falling for a man who was everything she should avoid and everything she was starting to need. Her life had transformed so completely she barely recognized it. And the most dangerous part wasn't the enemies Jinwoo had warned her about, wasn't the surveillance or the threats or the fortress she lived in. The most dangerous part was how right this all felt, how much she wanted to stay, how deeply she was already invested in this impossible family. She thought of Jinwoo's tears, of his admission that she'd given him hope. She thought of Miho reaching for her hand, calling her mama in his soft voice. She thought of the way Jinwoo had kissed her, careful and desperate and full of emotion he'd tried so hard to control. And she thought about how far she'd fallen from the woman who'd believed in doing things the right way, who'd thought principle mattered more than survival. That woman felt like a stranger now, naive and exhausted and alone. This woman, the one sitting in a crime boss's library with whiskey and racing heart. This woman was learning that morality wasn't black and white, that love found you in unexpected places, that sometimes the wrong choice was the only honest one. Amara finished her drink and closed her laptop, standing to return to her suite. Tomorrow she'd wake up and spend the morning with Miho, teaching him new words and watching him slowly emerge from his isolation. Tomorrow evening, she'd have dinner with Jinwoo and pretend her heart wasn't pounding every time their eyes met. And eventually, she'd have to figure out what it meant that she was falling in love with a dangerous man while helping his son learn to trust the world. But tonight, she just let herself feel it, the warmth and want and terrifying possibility. Tonight, she admitted to herself that this wasn't just a job anymore, wasn't just an arrangement. This was becoming something real, something that mattered, something that might save all three of them or destroy everything they were building. And for the first time in 3 weeks, Amara didn't feel trapped in a golden cage. She felt like she'd found exactly where she was supposed to be. 2 months into her arrangement with Park Jinwoo, Amara had almost forgotten what fear tasted like. The estate had become home, the routines had become comfortable, and the constant low-level security presence had faded into background noise she barely noticed. She'd grown used to the armed men positioned at strategic points around the property, used to the facial recognition security and the cameras that monitored every entrance. They were just part of the landscape, no more threatening than the expensive art or the manicured gardens. She should have paid more attention. The warning signs started small, easy to dismiss as coincidence or paranoia. Jinwoo spent more time in his office with the door closed, his expression harder when he emerged. Kwon and the security team increased their visible presence, More men on rotation, longer hours. The cheerful housekeeper, Mrs. Kim, seemed nervous, jumping at sudden sounds, her usual warm chatter replaced by tight smiles. Amara noticed, but didn't understand. Not really. Not until Jinwoo pulled her aside after breakfast on a Tuesday morning 2 months and 1 week after she'd moved in. His hand on her elbow was gentle but insistent, guiding her into his study and closing the door with quiet finality. "We need to talk about security," he said without preamble. His tie was already loosened despite the early hour, and there were shadows under his eyes that suggested he hadn't slept well. "What's wrong?" Amara asked, her stomach tightening with sudden anxiety. Jinwoo moved to his desk, pressing something that made the windows darken, privacy glass activating with a soft hum. "There's chatter. Intelligence suggesting one of my rival factions is planning something. They've been probing defenses, testing response times, gathering information." "About what?" Amara asked, though dread was already pooling in her chest. "About weaknesses," Jinwoo said flatly. "About things I care about that could be leveraged. They know Miho exists now. Your presence here, your connection to him, that's been noticed." Amara's blood went cold. "Noticed how?" Jinwoo's jaw tightened. "You've been here 2 months. Staff talk, suppliers notice changes, security rotations get observed. People in my world make it their business to watch for shifts and patterns. A new woman living in my house, spending time with my son, that's a pattern. They're trying to determine if you're significant, if you're a vulnerability they can exploit." The room felt suddenly too small, the air too thin. Amara's hands clenched in her lap. "What does that mean? What do they want? Information, leverage, or both?" Jinwoo replied. "If they can take you, they can use you against me. If they can take Miho." He didn't finish the sentence, but his expression went so dark and cold that Amara felt ice slide down her spine. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Jinwoo came around the desk, crouching in front of her chair so they were eye level. His hands covered hers, warm and solid. "First, you don't leave the estate. Not for any reason. Second, you stay in the secured wing when you're not with Miho. Third, there's a panic button being installed in every room you regularly use. If anything feels wrong, you press it immediately." "How long?" Amara asked. "How long do we live like this?" Jinwoo's expression was grim. "Until I eliminate the threat. I have people working on identifying the faction responsible, tracking their movements. When I know who they are and where they operate, I'll handle it permanently." "Permanently?" Amara repeated, understanding exactly what he meant. "Yes," Jinwoo said, his voice hard and absolute. "I don't negotiate with people who threaten my family. I remove them." Amara should have been horrified, should have been repulsed by the casual way he discussed violence, by the cold certainty in his eyes. But instead, she felt a strange, terrible relief. This man would protect them with ruthless efficiency. This man would do what was necessary. "Okay," she said quietly. "We'll be careful. We'll follow security protocols." Jinwoo's hands tightened on hers. "I won't let anything happen to you or Miho. You understand that. Whatever it takes, whoever I have to go through, I will keep you safe." "I know," Amara said, and realized she meant it. The next 3 days passed in tense anticipation, every sound making Amara's nerves jump, every shadow seeming to hold threat. Security around the estate had increased to the point where armed men were constantly visible, no longer trying to blend into the background. Miho sensed the tension, becoming more anxious, his meltdowns increasing despite Amara's best efforts to maintain his routine. Thursday afternoon found them in Miho's therapy room, working on emotional identification using picture cards. The boy was having a good day despite the stress, pointing to the happy face card, and then smiling himself, a genuine expression that made Amara's heart swell. He was making such progress, opening up more each week, beginning to trust that his world was predictable and safe. "Juasa," Amara praised in Korean. "Very good, Miho. You're working so hard today." Miho's dark eyes met hers, holding contact for a full 5 seconds before sliding away. "Progress. Beautiful, hard-won progress." The lights went out. Not a flicker, not a gradual dimming, but instant complete darkness. The therapy room's windows were covered with blackout shades for sensory control, and without the overhead lights, the space became a void. Amara's heart kicked into overdrive, adrenaline flooding her system. "Ginchana," she said immediately, keeping her voice calm even as her hands started shaking. It's okay, mijo. Just the lights. We're safe. But they weren't safe. She knew they weren't safe. Power didn't just cut in a building with backup generators and redundant systems. Emergency lighting activated, bathing everything in dim red that made shadows dance and stretch. The alarm system began screaming, a piercing wail that made Miho clap his hands over his ears and start keening, a high-pitched sound of distress that tore at Amar's heart. She scooped him up immediately, pulling him against her chest, one hand cupping the back of his head. Ginchana, Ginchana, she said urgently, her voice pitched low under the alarm. I'm here. Mama's here. We're okay. But her mind was racing, tactical training from her behavioral therapy work kicking in. Get to safe space. Protect the child. Call for help. Her hand fumbled for her phone in her pocket, hitting the panic button app Jinwoo's security team had installed. Then she moved, carrying Miho toward the corner of the room farthest from the door, the designated safe spot they'd identified in security briefings she'd only half paid attention to. Miho was crying now, overwhelmed by the alarm and the darkness and the break in routine. Amara pressed him against her shoulder, blocking one of his ears with her body, covering the other with her hand. She started humming, the Korean lullaby that always calmed him, even though her voice was shaking and her heart was hammering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. The sounds of breaking glass came from somewhere in the house. Shouting. Not Korean, not English, something else. Footsteps running, heavy boots on expensive floors. More breaking, closer now. The therapy room door was locked, reinforced, but Amara didn't trust it to hold against determined force. She crouched in the corner, making herself as small as possible, Miho tucked completely against her chest. She kept humming, kept speaking soft Korean, even as terror made her breath come in short gasps. Anjanu, you're safe. Nanan Irgi Hisa. I'm here. Umaga Jakurjulge. Mama will protect you. The door to the therapy room exploded inward, the reinforced lock no match for whatever they'd used. 3 men rushed in, big and armed, and moving with military precision. They wore dark clothes and had faces covered with masks, only their eyes visible, cold and focused. Amara's scream caught in her throat. Miho was shrieking now, full meltdown triggered by the violence and noise. She held him tighter, tucking his face against her neck so he couldn't see, couldn't witness this nightmare. The child, the lead man said in accented English. Give him to us. Amara's terror crystallized into something harder, something fierce. She pulled Miho closer, her body becoming a shield. No. The man stepped closer, and Amara could see the gun in his hand now. Black metal that looked enormous and impossible. Lady, we don't want to hurt you. Just give us the boy and we leave. You get to live. Amara's mind was screaming at her to comply, to hand over Miho and save herself. But her body refused. Her arms tightened, holding this child who called her mama, who trusted her to keep him safe. She couldn't. She wouldn't. You'll have to kill me first, she heard herself say, voice raw and shaking but absolute. The man's eyes narrowed. Stupid choice. He moved forward, reaching for Miho. Amara twisted away, putting her back to the wall, using her body as a barrier. The man grabbed her arm, his grip bruising, trying to pry her hands away from the child. Miho was screaming, a sound of pure terror that would haunt Amara forever if she survived this. Then the man's hand disappeared from her arm. The sound of impact, bone on flesh, brutally hard. The man flew backward, hitting the wall with a crack that suggested broken ribs, or worse. Park Jinwoo stood in the doorway, and Amara had never seen him look like this. The controlled businessman was gone. This was something else entirely, something cold and deadly and absolutely terrifying. He moved like violence personified. The second man raised his gun and Jinwoo was on him before he could fire, disarming him with a move too fast to follow, then using the weapon as a club. The third man tried to run and Jinwoo caught him, taking him down with efficient brutality. The whole thing lasted maybe 30 seconds. 3 armed men neutralized by 1 man in an expensive suit who moved like trained death. When it was over, Jinwoo stood in the center of the room, breathing hard, holding a gun that wasn't his, surrounded by 3 groaning bodies. Then his eyes found Amara, still crouched in the corner with Miho pressed against her chest. the deadly cold in his expression fractured, replaced by something raw and desperate. He crossed to them in 3 strides, dropping to his knees in front of them. "Are you hurt?" His hands were on her face, her arms, checking for injuries with shaking fingers. "Did they hurt you? Did they touch Miho?" "We're okay," Amara managed, her voice breaking on the words. "We're okay. I didn't let them take him." Jinwoo pulled them both against his chest, his arms wrapping around them with desperate strength. "I couldn't get here fast enough. When the alarm went off, when I saw they'd breached the secured wing, I thought." His voice cracked completely. Quan appeared in the doorway with 4 more security men. "Sir, take them to the basement," Jinwoo said, his voice going cold again, not looking away from Amara and Miho. "All 3. I'll deal with them later. Secure the house. I want a full report in 10 minutes on how they got through our defenses." The men moved efficiently, removing the 3 intruders who were now being restrained with zip ties. Amara watched them go, her mind still struggling to process that this had actually happened, that men had broken into a secured estate and tried to kidnap a 4-year-old child. Miho had stopped screaming, his body going limp with exhaustion, still pressed against Amara, but quiet now except for hitching breaths. She was still humming automatically, the Korean lullaby, even though her voice was shaking and tears were streaming down her face. Jinwoo carefully took Miho from her arms, cradling his son with infinite gentleness. "Come on," he said softly. "Let's get you both somewhere safe." He led them through the house, Amara noticing for the first time the destruction. Broken windows, damaged doors, security systems torn apart. This had been a coordinated professional assault, and it had gotten terrifyingly close to succeeding. Jinwoo brought them to his private quarters, a suite Amara had never entered before. He laid Miho on the massive bed, the boy immediately curling into a ball, hands over his ears, rocking slightly. Amara climbed onto the bed beside him, resuming her position as comfort and shield, speaking soft Korean, maintaining the illusion of safety even though her whole body was shaking with delayed reaction. Jinwoo disappeared into his bathroom, returning with a first aid kit. He sat on the edge of the bed, reaching for Amara's arm where the intruder had grabbed her. His fingers were gentle as he pushed up her sleeve, revealing the bruises already forming, dark fingerprints on her brown skin. His jaw went so tight, she could see the muscle jumping. "I'm going to kill them," he said quietly, slowly, "for touching you." "Jinwoo," Amara started, but he cut her off. "No, they threatened my son. They put their hands on you. There's no negotiation, no mercy. They're already dead, they just don't know it yet." He opened the first aid kit, pulling out an ice pack and activating it, held it gently against her bruised arm. His other hand cupped her face, his thumb brushing away her tears. "You protected him," Jinwoo said, his voice rough with emotion. "When armed men told you to give him up, you refused. You were willing to die for my son. He's my responsibility," Amara said, her voice shaking. "I couldn't just hand him over." Jinwoo's eyes were shining now, tears tracking down his cheeks despite his rigid control. "You called yourself his mama. You meant it." "I did," Amara whispered. "I do." Jinwoo leaned forward, pressing his forehead against hers. "I have to go. I have to handle this now, before they regroup, before they try again. But I need to know you're safe first." "Where are you going?" Amara asked, though she knew. "To end this," Jinwoo said simply. "The faction responsible for this, their leadership, their operations, all of it. By morning, they won't exist anymore." "Jinwoo, that's..." Amara stopped, unsure what she was trying to say. "Murder. War. Justice. All 3. Necessary," Jinwoo finished for her. "I won't apologize for protecting my family. I won't feel guilt for eliminating people who tried to take my son." Amara looked at this man who had just beaten 3 armed intruders with his bare hands, who was planning to go out into the night and destroy an entire criminal faction, who held an ice pack against her bruises with infinite gentleness. She should be horrified, should be repulsed, should be demanding he call the police instead of taking this into his own hands. But all she felt was grim acceptance. This was his world. This was how threats were handled. And if she was honest with herself, she wanted those men gone. Wanted them eliminated so thoroughly they could never threaten Miho again. "Be careful," she said quietly. Jinwoo's hand tightened on her face. "Always. For you and him, I'll always come back." He stood, pulling out his phone, already making calls in rapid Korean. Amara heard words she recognized. Mobilize. Now. Everyone. Eliminate. His voice was cold and commanding. The businessman replaced entirely by something harder. Quan will stay here with additional security, Jinwoo said, turning back to her. No one gets in. You're safe until I return. Then he was gone, moving with purpose toward violence Amara could only imagine. She lay beside Miho, holding the exhausted child as he finally slipped into traumatized sleep, listening to vehicles departing outside, engines and shouted orders, and the systematic mobilization of Jinwoo's entire security force. Hours passed. Amara dozed fitfully, jerking awake at every sound, her body unable to release the tension. Miho slept deeply, his small body exhausted from fear and crying, his hand clutching Amara's shirt like a lifeline. Dawn was filtering through the windows when she heard the bedroom door open. Amara sat up immediately, heart pounding, but it was Jinwoo. He looked different, harder somehow, wearing different clothes than when he'd left. His suit was gone, replaced by dark tactical clothing. There was something in his expression, a coldness that hadn't been there before, like he'd done things in the night that had changed him. Is it done? Amara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. It's done, Jinwoo confirmed. The faction no longer exists. Their leadership is gone. Their operations are dismantled. The men who came here, he paused, they're gone too. Permanently. Amara should ask questions. Should demand details about what gone meant, about how many people had died to secure their safety. But she found she didn't want to know. Knowing would make her complicit in a different way, would require her to process choices she didn't want to examine. We're safe, she said instead. You're safe, Jinwoo agreed. I've eliminated the threat completely. No one will ever try this again. He moved to the bed, sitting on the edge, looking down at his sleeping son. How is he? Exhausted but physically unharmed, Amara replied. Emotionally, this will set him back. He'll need time to feel safe again. But we'll work through it. Jinwoo reached out, his hand resting gently on Miho's small back. Because of you, he's alive. Because you refused to give him up, even when they threatened you. I couldn't, Amara said simply. He's mine to protect. Jinwoo's eyes met hers, dark and intense and full of emotion he wasn't trying to hide. You're mine to protect too. And I failed. They got through my security, got into my house, got their hands on you. You didn't fail, Amara said firmly. You got there in time. You stopped them. You kept us safe. Jinwoo's hand moved from Miho to Amara's face, cupping her cheek with infinite gentleness that contrasted sharply with the violence she knew he'd just committed. I love you, he said quietly. I should probably wait to tell you that. Should probably let you process what happened. But I almost lost you tonight, and I can't waste time pretending I feel less than I do. I love you, Amara. Not just for what you do for my son, but for who you are. For your strength and compassion and the way you refused to surrender even when you were terrified. Amara's breath caught, tears forming again. Jinwoo, I can't. She couldn't find words for the tangle of emotions in her chest. You don't have to say anything, Jinwoo said. I just needed you to know. Needed you to understand that you're not just my employee, not just Miho's caregiver. You're my family. Both of you. And I will burn the world down before I let anyone threaten my family again. Amara leaned into his touch, closing her eyes, accepting the truth of what he was saying. She'd fallen in love with this dangerous man, this criminal who killed to protect, who was gentle with his son and ruthless with his enemies. She loved him despite everything she'd believed about right and wrong, or maybe because he'd shown her that morality wasn't as simple as she'd thought. I love you too, she whispered. God help me, I love you too. Jinwoo pulled her close, careful not to wake Miho, holding her while the sun rose over the city and illuminated the fortress they defended. In that moment, wrapped in his arms with his child sleeping peacefully beside them, Amara understood that she'd made her choice weeks ago. Not when she'd accepted his employment offer, but when she'd refused to let armed men take Miho. When she'd chosen this family over her own safety. When she'd accepted that love meant protection, and protection sometimes required darkness. She was part of this world now, part of Jinwoo's dangerous life, and there was no going back. But looking at the man who'd come back to her covered in the evidence of violence committed for their safety, looking at the child who called her mama and trusted her absolutely, Amara found she didn't want to go back. This was her family. This was her home. and she would protect it with everything she had, the same way Jinwoo protected them. The morning after the attack, Amara woke to find Miho already awake beside her, his dark eyes studying her face with an intensity that was new. He'd slept in Jinwoo's bed with them, the three of them tangled together like a real family seeking comfort in proximity. The child who had been screaming in terror hours ago now seemed calm, present, as if the violence had somehow clarified something for him rather than traumatizing him further. Miho said softly, his small hand reaching up to touch her cheek. Ginchanayo. The question, "Are you okay?" spoken in his quiet voice with perfect pronunciation, made Amara's eyes burn with tears. This child, who struggled with every word, who had to fight for every connection, was checking on her emotional state. "Ne, Ginchana," Amara replied, her voice thick. "Yes, I'm okay." "Minonin, Ginchanayo. Are you okay?" Miho nodded, then did something he'd never done before. He wrapped his small arms around her neck and held on. A real embrace, sustained and meaningful. Amara's tears fell freely now, her hands coming up to hold this precious child who was finally reaching out. Jinwoo appeared in the doorway, freshly showered and dressed in casual clothes, holding a tray with coffee and juice. He stopped when he saw them, his expression transforming into something soft and wondering. "He's never done that before," Jinwoo said quietly. "Never initiated a hug." "He asked if I was okay," Amara said, still holding Miho. In Korean. A complete question. Jinwoo set the tray down on the bedside table, his hands not quite steady. "He's been waiting. All this time, he's been waiting to feel safe enough to reach out. And you gave him that safety." "We gave him that," Amara corrected. "You came for us. You protected us. He knows he's safe because of you." Jinwoo sat on the edge of the bed, his hand resting on Miho's back. The three of them stayed like that for a long moment. A unit, a family forged through crisis and love and the kind of devotion that didn't fit neat moral categories. Eventually, Miho pulled back, looking at his father with those serious dark eyes. "Abba," he said, then reached for Jinwoo's hand. "Gumo. Thank you." Spoken clearly, deliberately, with full awareness of meaning. Jinwoo's control shattered completely. He pulled his son into his arms, burying his face in Miho's dark hair, his shoulders shaking with emotion he'd held back for 4 years. Amara watched father and son hold each other, watched Jinwoo cry with relief and joy and the kind of gratitude that came from believing something was impossible and then having it happen anyway. She understood in that moment that everything, all the complicated choices and moral compromises and dangerous arrangements, had led to this. To a child who could finally express love. To a father who could finally receive it. To a family that had been broken and was now healing. After breakfast, after Miho was settled with supervised play in his room with extra security, Jinwoo found Amara in the library. She was sitting by the window, staring out at the estate grounds that had been violated last night but were now peaceful again, secured by men who would die before letting another intruder through. "We need to talk," Jinwoo said, closing the library door behind him. Amara turned to face him, her heart already racing. "About what happened?" "About everything," Jinwoo replied. "About what last night made crystal clear to me. About what I can't wait another day to say." He crossed the room, not sitting but standing in front of her, his presence overwhelming in the way it had been from the beginning. But now instead of intimidating, it felt safe. This man was her protection, her partner, her future. "I told you I love you," Jinwoo started, his voice steady but his eyes intense. "I meant it. I've probably loved you since the moment you refused to let armed men take my son, maybe even before that. But love isn't enough, Amara. I need more than love." His hands framed her face, thumbs tracing along her cheekbones. "I need permanence. I need commitment. I need to know that you're mine in every way that matters, not just as my employee or Miho's caregiver, but as my partner, my woman, my future." "Jinwoo," Amara breathed, her heart hammering. "You're mine, Amara," Jinwoo said, his voice dropping into something deeper, more possessive, absolute in its certainty. "Mine to protect, mine to cherish, mine to build a life with. I don't share. I don't compromise. When I claim something, I keep it forever. And I'm claiming you now." His hands tightened slightly on her face, not painful but firm, grounding. You walked into my son's life and gave him his mother's voice. You walked into my life and reminded me there's more to living than power and control. You stood between my child and armed men and refused to surrender. You're the strongest person I've ever met, and you're mine." Amara's breath was coming faster, her whole body responding to the raw possession in his voice, in his eyes, in the way he held her like she was precious and essential and absolutely his. "I'm yours," she agreed, her voice shaking. "And you're mine, Jinwoo. Your darkness, your devotion, your broken pieces and fierce protection. All of it. Mine. Forever," Jinwoo said, and it wasn't a question. "Forever," Amara confirmed. Jinwoo kissed her then, deep and claiming and full of promise. His hands slid into her hair, angling her head for better access, taking what he wanted with the same confidence he brought to everything else. Amara melted into it, her hands gripping his shirt, pulling him closer, accepting his claim and making her own. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Jinwoo rested his forehead against hers. "I have something for you," he said quietly. He pulled back and reached into his pocket, producing a small black velvet box. Amara's heart stopped, then started again with painful intensity. Jinwoo opened the box to reveal a ring that made her breath catch. The center stone was a deep blue sapphire, surrounded by small diamonds, set in platinum. It was elegant and substantial and absolutely beautiful, the kind of ring that carried weight and meaning and permanence. "Marry me," Jinwoo said, his voice rough with emotion. "Not because of our arrangement, not because of Miho, but because I love you and I want you as my wife. Be the legal mother to my son. Be the partner I build my life with. Let me give you my name, my protection, my everything." He took the ring from the box, holding it ready. "I know I'm not what you imagined when you thought about marriage. I'm a criminal. I operate in darkness. I solve problems with violence. But I will love you with everything I have. I will protect you and Miho with my life. I will build you a future so secure, so stable, that you'll never have to be afraid again." "Yes," Amara said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, I'll marry you. Yes to everything." Jinwoo slid the ring onto her finger, the fit perfect, the weight substantial. Then he pulled her into his arms, holding her tight enough that she could feel his heart racing, could feel the emotion vibrating through him. "Thank you," he murmured against her hair. "Thank you for choosing us. For staying. For loving me despite what I am. Because of what you are," Amara corrected. "You're a good father and a fierce protector and the man I love. All of it together." Jinwoo pulled back enough to look at her face, his thumb brushing away her tears. "We'll marry quickly. Within the month. Private ceremony, just us and the people who matter. And I want to start adoption proceedings immediately. I want you to be Miho's legal mother, with all the rights and protections that provides." Amara nodded, overwhelmed by how fast everything was moving, how completely her life had transformed. 3 months ago I was drowning in debt and exhaustion. Now I'm engaged to you, about to become Miho's legal mother, living in a fortress and accepting that violence is part of protection. Jinwoo's expression grew serious. "Do you regret it? Any of it?" Amara thought about her old apartment, her 3 jobs, her impossible student loans. She thought about the woman she'd been, naive about morality and exhausted from principle. Then she thought about Miho's arms around her neck this morning, about Jinwoo's confession of love, about having purpose and safety and family. "Not even a little bit," she said firmly. "This is exactly where I'm supposed to be." The library door burst open. Miho ran in, followed by an apologetic security guard trying to catch him. The boy's face was bright with excitement, all traces of last night's trauma apparently processed and released. He launched himself at Amara and Jinwoo, wrapping his arms around both their legs. Abba," he said clearly, looking up at them with joy in his dark eyes. "Gachi Naraya. Play together?" Jinwoo scooped his son up, settling him on his hip. "Yes, we'll play together. The 3 of us." Miho's hand reached out, grabbing Amara's hand, his small fingers wrapping around hers where the sapphire ring now sat. He studied the ring with fascination, then looked at Jinwoo. "Iboa," he pronounced. "Pretty." "Yes," Jinwoo agreed, looking at Amara rather than the ring. "Very pretty." For those of you who've been following this story, who've watched someone's life transform from struggle to security, from isolation to family, Drop a comment about what family means to you. Sometimes family isn't what you're born into. It's what you choose and what chooses you back. Sometimes love shows up in unexpected packages and asks you to be brave enough to accept it. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of planning and legal proceedings and slow, steady routine. Miho continued to blossom, his vocabulary expanding daily, his willingness to engage growing stronger. He started asking questions, forming connections, showing curiosity about his world in ways he never had before. The attack, rather than traumatizing him, seemed to have clarified his understanding of safety. He knew now, with certainty, that his mama and papa would protect him. That knowledge freed him to explore and grow. Jinwoo handled the adoption paperwork with the same ruthless efficiency he brought to everything else. Lawyers appeared, documents were filed, and within days the process was moving forward faster than should have been possible. Money and influence had their advantages, and Jinwoo used both without apology. The wedding was planned for 3 weeks after the proposal, a small private ceremony in the estate gardens with only essential people present. Mrs. Kim cried through the entire planning process, thrilled to see her employer finding happiness. Kwon, the stern head of security, actually smiled when Jinwoo announced the engagement, a rare show of emotion from a man who lived in stoic protection. Amara completed her behavioral therapy certification during those weeks, passing her boards with scores that reflected 2 years of exhaustion and study. Jinwoo framed her certificate and hung it in the library with pride that seemed disproportionate to the accomplishment but made her heart swell anyway. The wedding day arrived clear and beautiful, autumn sun warming the gardens that had been decorated with elegant simplicity. Amara wore a dress of ivory silk that Jinwoo had commissioned from a designer she'd never heard of but who apparently dressed royalty. Simple, elegant, perfect. Her natural hair was styled in an updo that showed off her face and the sapphire earrings that matched her ring, Jinwoo's wedding gift. Miho was their ring bearer, wearing a miniature version of his father's dark suit, carrying the rings on a small pillow with serious concentration. He walked down the makeshift aisle with careful steps, his eyes tracking between his parents, making sure they were both watching him succeed at this important task. The ceremony was brief and meaningful. Traditional vows spoken in both English and Korean, promises of devotion and partnership and forever. When the officiant pronounced them married, Jinwoo kissed her with the same claiming intensity as his proposal, his hands framing her face, his expression fierce with possession and love. Maiane, he murmured against her lips. My wife. Nau Nampon, Amara replied. My husband. Miho cheered, clapping his hands with unrestrained joy, and the small gathering erupted in applause. Mrs. Kim was crying openly, Kwon was smiling again, and the handful of Jinwoo's closest associates looked satisfied that their boss had found someone worthy of his devotion. The reception was small and warm, held in the estate's dining room that had been transformed with flowers and soft lighting. Miho stayed for the entire thing, more engaged than he'd ever been at a social function, dancing with Amara and climbing on Jinwoo's lap and asking questions about why people were eating cake in the daytime. As the sun set and guests departed, Jinwoo found Amara on the terrace overlooking the gardens, his arms wrapping around her from behind. Happy, Mrs. Park? He asked quietly. Amara leaned back against him, looking out at the estate that was now legally her home, thinking about the child upstairs who would soon legally be her son. Happier than I knew was possible. Jinwoo's arms tightened. I told you that night in my study, months ago, that I would give you security and purpose and a future. I've kept that promise. You have, Amara agreed. You've given me everything you promised and more. Family, love, a child to raise, a home that feels real. Jinwoo turned her in his arms, his dark eyes searching her face. No regrets. Even knowing what I am, what I've done to keep us safe. Amara thought about the rival faction that no longer existed, about the violence committed in darkness to secure their peace. She thought about moral absolutism and the way reality was more complicated than she believed at 24 with her naive principles. No regrets, she confirmed. You protected us. That's what matters. Jinwoo kissed her forehead, gentle and reverent. You've made me better. You and Miho. You've given me something worth protecting, worth building for. I'm not a good man, but I'm trying to be a good husband and father. You already are, Amara said. You show up every day. You love your son with everything you have. You've given me a life I never dreamed of having. That's more than enough. They stood there as darkness fell, wrapped in each other and the peace they'd fought for. Inside, Miho was being put to bed by Mrs. Kim, probably asking 1,000 questions about the wedding and what being married meant. Tomorrow, life would continue, therapy sessions and business meetings, and the careful balance of raising a child with special needs in a world that wasn't always kind. But tonight, they were just a family. A man who had learned that love was stronger than control. A woman who had learned that morality wasn't black and white. And a child who had finally found his voice and the safety to use it. 3 months ago, Amara had been drowning, counting the days until her next loan payment, working herself to exhaustion with no hope of anything better. She'd helped a stranger's child out of instinct and compassion, never imagining that single act would lead here. To a sapphire ring on her finger and a dangerous man's devotion and a 4-year-old calling her mama. She'd walked into Park Jinwa's world speaking Korean to a crying child. She'd walked out with a Mafia boss's absolute possession, a son who was learning to trust the world, and a future so secure that nothing could shake it. Not threats, not violence, not the complicated ethics of loving a man who operated in darkness. She was Amara Park now, wife and mother and partner to someone powerful enough to eliminate anyone who threatened their family. She lived in a fortress, loved a criminal, and had never been happier in her life. Sometimes the wrong choice was the only honest one. Sometimes survival required compromise. Sometimes love showed up wearing an expensive suit and carrying the weight of past violence, asking you to accept protection in exchange for opening your heart. And sometimes, if you were brave enough to say yes, you found exactly what you'd been searching for all along. Not safety through independence, but security through partnership. Not moral purity, but honest love that acknowledged darkness while choosing light. Not perfection, but something real and fierce and absolutely worth fighting for. Amara had made her choice. She'd chosen family over fear, love over principle, this dangerous, beautiful life over the exhausting loneliness of her past. And looking at her husband, thinking about their son sleeping peacefully upstairs, feeling the weight of the sapphire ring that marked her as claimed and cherished and absolutely his, she knew with complete certainty that she would make the same choice every single time. Forever, she whispered into the night. Jinwa's arms tightened around her, his voice warm and certain against her ear. Forever, he agreed. And in the fortress they'd defended and the family they'd built and the love they'd found in the most unexpected way, that promise felt absolutely unbreakable.